The Specter of Communism in Hawaii, 1947 to 1953. Chapter 12, Jack Kawano Goes to Washington. In the spring of 1951, the communist issue flared to life on the campus of the University of Hawaii. Controversy arose when President Greg Sinclair canceled an invitation which had been extended to the noted Caltech scientist, Linus Pauling, to speak at the dedication of the university's new chemistry building. Sinclair explained that after learning that Dr. Pauling, who was later the recipient of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, 1954, and the Nobel Peace Prize, 1962, has affiliations with organizations that have been referred to as subversive, and also that he has refused to testify under oath that he is not a communist. I felt it was not in the best interest of the university to invite him to be the speaker. There was irony in the situation since Sinclair was then a member of the board of directors of the Institute of Pacific Relations, which had been labeled as a subversive organization by the United States Attorney General. Pauling protested Sinclair's action, which apparently had been dictated by quiet pressure from the university's Board of Regents. In a letter to Sinclair and the Regents, Pauling explained that the decision to rescind the invitation had caused him great embarrassment. The scientist also explained to the Regents that he was not, nor had he ever been a member of the Communist Party, referring to himself as a Roosevelt Democrat. Pauling defended his right not to testify publicly on the question of whether or not he was a member of the Communist Party as a matter of conscience. His protest was to no avail. One of the leaders of the student protest against President Sinclair's action was a candidate for the student body presidency, Shunichi Kimura. Another was the associate editor of the University of Hawaii's student newspaper, John Griffin. Griffin, who wrote a column called Cross Currents, told of a young co-ed who was wavering in her support of Kimura because a sorority sister had told her Kimura was a communist. In another column, Griffin commented upon the whole episode. In light of recent events, it should start to become obvious to the average man that the crusade against creeping communism could and may be a thinly veiled cover-up for creeping fascism. The sad part of it is that most of these men who would preserve democracy by limiting it are sincere. Though the students failed in their efforts to get the Board of Regents to change its mind, there was enough unity among them to support a student-sponsored visit to Hawaii for Linus Pauling in late May and early June 1951. Another campus issue involving the communist question arose in the spring of 1951 when the territorial legislature passed a series of loyalty measures. 220 faculty members and an almost equal number of students signed petitions requesting that Hawaii's new governor, Oren Elam, veto the measures. Koji Ariyoshi commented on the matter in a Honolulu Record editorial. The dangers to our institutions as well as to individual liberties inherent in these bills are all too clear in light of recent developments in world history and in the attitude and conduct of the type of man who would administer the loyalty oath program. For example, Edward N. Silva, chairman of the Territorial Un-American Commission, in trembling emotion and illogical argument, this week tried to dismiss the flood of protests from the Manoa campus by calling the deans, professors, and instructors sincere but misguided intellectuals whose opposition to the loyalty bills contrasted with the devotion of our brave boys who are clinging to the blood-soaked peninsula of Korea. Under the proposed loyalty bills, the signers of the petition would be suspect, for as Silva says, their opposition to one of the bills subjects the judgment of the signers to serious doubt. This is only one step removed from casting reasonable doubt on the loyalty of the signers, and reasonable doubt is sufficient grounds under the loyalty bills for dismissal. An informer, full of spite and hatred or for fun, can finger an individual. The accuser is protected. He need not prove his allegations. He does not face the accused. The accused must clear himself. The faculty at the university is aware of the historical parallel of what is happening today with what has happened in the past. Max Ascoli, a professor in Italian universities until the year of the loyalty oath, 1931, wrote in 1938 a brief description of how the oath in Italy proved to be a preliminary to something else. The fall of 1931, when all professors, in Italy but 12 took the oath, marked the turning point. From that time on, the pressure upon the university teachers went on with increased impetus. The oath had meaning only if supplemented by more positive acts of loyalty. More and more exacting and detailed. Footnote, Honolulu Record, May 17, 1951, page 8. Ariyoshi's use of the term reasonable doubt and his concern over the escalation of loyalty programs was not without foundation. Only the month before, the Truman administration had amended the standard for dismissal of federal employees under the government's loyalty program. A report prepared for the Peace Education Division of the American Friends Service Committee, Anatomy of Anti-Communism, New York, Hill and Wen, Inc., 1969, page 38 to 39, states, as originally established, the program reflected a concern to ensure against the abuse of loyalty charges and provided that dismissal should be based on hard evidence that reasonable grounds exist for the belief that the person involved is disloyal to the government of the United States. The revised loyalty standard, April 1951, stipulated that reasonable doubt exists as to the loyalty of the individual involved to the government of the United States. The changes from grounds to doubt and from disloyalty to loyalty were not semantic. Rather, they reflected a different set of priorities and expedited dismissal of suspect individuals. Footnote end. Governor Long signed the loyalty measures. A week after he had done so, Koji Ariyoshi was indelicate enough to print a statement written by the governor in 1936 while he was serving as superintendent of public instruction for the territory of Hawaii. In his statement, Long was protesting a measure passed by the territory's 26th legislature requiring that teachers submit to a loyalty oath. It is those who would make of a teacher a cloistered monk, Long contended, something less than a citizen, who suggest that the teacher be required to take a loyalty oath. Long went on to say that he should not wish to sign one, but the territory's loyalty measures seem to have been borne lightly by the university faculty. In a 1975 interview with Alan Saunders, one of the leading liberals on the faculty of the University of Hawaii during the late 1940s and early 1950s, the author commented that he had been unable to find any evidence of campus unrest over the issue of loyalty oaths beyond that cited above. Dr. Saunders confirmed that this had been the case, explaining that those protests which were made privately and worked out in such a way that the campus did not become preoccupied with the matter. Footnote, interview with Dr. Alan Saunders, March 22, 1975. Dr. Saunders also commented that the polling incident and the loyalty oath flap had been welcome because it did stimulate activity among both students and faculty for social consciousness. In an interview with Dr. John Stalker on March 25, 1975, Saunders' recollection of the matter was not supported. Dr. Stalker himself was a spokesman for the faculty group protesting the loyalty oaths. When Stalker appeared on the Aku radio program for a debate on the issue, his opponent, Territorial Attorney General Edward N. Silva, did not show up. Stalker attributed the subsequent campus calm on the issue of loyalty oaths to the sensitivity with which it was handled by Paul Bachman, Dean of the Faculty of the University of Hawaii. Footnote end. But the anti-communist activity involving the University of Hawaii was no more than a preliminary to the truly critical events in the year 1951. These events took place in the summer within a space of less than 2 months, from July 6 to August 28. On July 6, 1951, Jack Kawano appeared before the House Committee on Un-American Activities in Washington, D.C. Though his appearance before HUAC was not anticipated, his role as a loner had been building up for some time. There was his obvious alienation from Union leadership during the 1949 dock strike, his departure from the ILWU thereafter, his unequivocal statement before HUAC in April 1950 that he was not a member of the Communist Party, though he was cited for contempt for refusing to answer other questions on the basis of the Fifth Amendment, and his retention of separate counsel at the trial of the reluctant 39. Kawano's actions since the 1949 dock strike had served to prepare the ILWU for his public admission on February 10, 1951, that he had been a member of the Communist Party. In a press release, Kawano said, in part, "I joined the Communist Party because some individual communists were willing to assist me in organizing the Waterfront Union. The waterfront employers were totally intolerant of labor unions. They did all they could to smash all attempts to organize the waterfront. No civic or community organizations showed any signs of willingness to assist in our organizing efforts. I did not think it was harmful to the union as long as the communists were willing to assist me in bringing up the living standards of the workingmen because they led me to believe that the basic existence of the Communist Party was primarily to promote the best interests of the workingmen. I decided to quit the Communist Party because I found that the primary existence of the Communist Party was not for the best interests of the working man but to dupe the members of the union, to control the union, and to use the union for purposes other than strictly trade union matters. Today I am more than ever convinced that I did right by quitting the Communist Party, for in view of the international situation, when our boys are giving their lives to their country which is at war with Communist Korea and China, I cannot help but believe that anyone who is a communist and is willing to assist Communist Korea, China, or any other communist nation today is dangerously flirting with treason against his own country. For the sake of the Union, I call on you to check on what I have said. It is your duty to investigate, to ask pointed questions, to get information. When you have done so, you will find the destructive effects of communism within the Union. I strongly urge the rank and file members of the ILWU, every one of them, to fight to keep the control and the management of their union and union activities in the hands of the rank and file members. To accomplish this important task, all communists and those who follow the communist line should be rejected by the rank and file membership. The full force of Kawano's statement did not hit the community when it was originally made for two reasons. First, the statement was very general in nature. Second, Kawano had no forum in which to develop his charges. Kawano's request to have a letter read to the delegates at the ILWU's 9th Biennial Convention in April was denied. Footnote: Kawano's press release of February 10, 1951 and his letter to the delegates at the ILWU convention, dated April 5, 1951, appear at the end of this work as appendices J and K, respectively. Footnote end. But on July 6, 1951, Jack Kawano appeared before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, accompanied by Chuck Mao, and told his story. In more than 50 pages of recorded testimony, Kawano cited chapter and verse on the Communist Party in Hawaii, giving names, dates, and places. His testimony, which had a strong ring of authenticity, was aided by a friendly committee and the absence of cross-examination. The 40-year-old Kawano was born at Puna on the Big Island on February 27, 1911. He had left school after the 7th grade and after working at a variety of jobs on the Big Island for 10 years had gone to Honolulu at the age of 23 to work as a longshoreman. He told the committee of his role in the development of the ILWU and proudly displayed a picture of Harry Bridges with the inscription, "To Kawano, who pioneered in leading a great movement." Unlike Akira Izuka, who had never held more than a marginal position of leadership in the ILWU, Kawano had, indeed, been an important figure in the establishment of the Union. This, of course, was what made Kawano's testimony so important. Kawano told the committee how he had been brought into the Communist Party in 1937 by Bill Bailey, who had recently arrived in Hawaii from the East Coast. Bailey had given Kawano his Traveler's Club card, otherwise known as a communist card. He told us that as long as we carried that card, we would be respected by all good Union men from the mainland, and we could count on Harry Bridges to help us. Footnote: HUAC Hearings, Kawano, 1951, page 9. Like Emil Muller at the HUAC hearings in Honolulu in April 1950, Kawano placed Ed Berman at Communist Party meetings, an assertion which Berman had vehemently denied in 1950 and was again prepared to deny. In a July 10, 1973 interview with the author, Berman said that he had offered Richard Gladstein his testimony as a rebuttal witness to Kawano, but Gladstein had declined, saying that Berman's testimony would not advance the cause of the defense. Footnote end. When asked what Bailey had said at the first Communist Party meeting, Kawano replied that the general trend of thought was like this, that the bosses are no good, that workers can live without the bosses, and we should try to get rid of the bosses by forming an organization and fighting the bosses, first through the Union and later through the revolution. Footnote: HUAC Hearings, Kawano, 1951, page 10. Francis Walter's comment to Kawano following the statement above deserves attention here as it shows the way in which Kawano was being encouraged in his testimony as well as giving us a glimpse of the thought processes of the subcommittee's presiding officer. Walter said, "It would interest you to know that recently a young Chinaman testified before the Committee on Immigration and Naturalization and told exactly the same story in relating what occurred in China when the communists moved in. Then when the communists came into power, the owners of this small factory where he worked were murdered. So you can see that what you were told about the bosses being bad is part of the general line that the communists employ." Footnote end. The preliminaries out of the way, HUAC counsel Frank Taverner started feeding Kawano names, asking him to comment on whether, to his knowledge, each was a member of the Communist Party. Of the first 22 names read to him, Kawano identified 7 as members of the Communist Party, including Levi Kiloha, Jack Hall, Ben Kahawinui, William Pilani, whom Kawano pointed out was also known as William Kamaka, appearing as a friendly witness before HUAC in Honolulu in April 1950, Ed Berman, Jack Komodo, and George Godu. Kawano was then asked about the early organization of the Communist Party in the years before World War II, and the way in which the party was used to control the Union movement. He described as having been sent to the Communist Party school in San Francisco during the months of September and October, 1938. Footnote: there has been much debate over the question of whether the California Labor School was a Communist Party school. Those who deny it have pointed to the fact that the San Francisco school openly advertised in a number of California newspapers and that instruction at the school was available to veterans at the end of World War II under the subsidy of the GI. though those who contend that it was a Communist Party school point to specific members of the Communist Party who studied and taught there, as well as the unquestionable Marxist slant evident in the lesson plans and books used at the school. Both sides have valid points. Footnote end. Kawano then told the committee that after his return from California he had helped hold the Union together at a time when they, having just lost a National Labor Relations Board election, were ready to throw in the towel. Kawano claimed that he had pulled the Union back together and led the ILWU to its first NLRB certification in 1941. Francis Walter, leading Kawano along, then asked, "How did Hall muscle his way into the Union then?" "He didn't muscle his way in," Kawano replied. Footnote, HUAC Hearings, Kawano, 1951, page 20. Though a technical case could be made in support of Kawano's statement, since Jack Hall was not a member of Longshore Local of which Jack Kawano was president, this is a gross distortion of Hawaii's labor history. Hall's position as the key local figure in the organization of the ILWU is secure. Footnote end. Jack Kawano continued to weave the thread of Communist Party control into his testimony. At one point he described how Robert McElrath had brought his dry dock union into the CIO at the end of World War II. The following exchange is interesting. Taverner, was McElrath known to you to be a member of the Communist Party at that time? Kawano, he was. Taverner, and was it the Communist Party that brought McElrath's union into the CIO? Kawano, that is correct. Kawano's testimony then turned to the reorganization of the Communist Party at the end of the war, particularly about the arrival of Dwight James Freeman in 1946. Kawano described the process of reorganization. "We ran into a lot of problems because we signed a lot of people in the Communist Party who had no idea what the Communist Party meant, and we needed somebody to educate them and to recruit new people into the party. We needed a good live wire person to do that particular work for the party in Hawaii. We requested the party in San Francisco to send such a person, and the party sent Freeman. After Freeman's arrival the party stepped up its activities even more. Charles and Eileen Fujimoto were assigned to work under the direction of Jim Freeman. The line of inquiry then turned to party organization, Communist Party conventions, and the composition of the executive board of the Communist Party. Kawano told HUAC that the Honolulu Record was the creation of the Communist Party, describing at length how Koji Ariyoshi was selected to establish the paper. Kawano, we heard news he was already a communist, and he was a local boy, so we felt he would be a logical guy to head up a newspaper that the Communist Party was interested in formulating. That is how we got him to come to Hawaii. Taverner, we means who? Kawano, Jack Hall, John Rienecki, Jack Komodo, people like that. Taverner, in other words, communists. Kawano, that is right. Turning to politics, Kawano discussed the relationship between the Communist Party and the CIO PAC and then moved on to the Communist Party decision to infiltrate the Democratic Party in 1948. Kawano's description of the meeting at which the decision was made is most revealing. In 1948 there was a tremendous amount of discussion among the communists regarding the failure of PAC in territorial politics, and in early 1948, at Jack Hall's Manoa home, the executive board called an enlarged committee meeting to discuss the question of politics. This is not a regular executive board meeting, so there would be many people attending, and there might even be a few non-communists attending. Party members felt pretty safe in having non-communists come in because the subject we were going to talk about was only on politics. Kawano listed the decisions made at that enlarged committee meeting as follows. 1. The Communist Party, through the ILWU and other organizations, will join the Democratic Party. 2. Take over leadership of it by getting the majority of convention delegates elected who are communists, communist sympathizers, or at least union men. 3. Elect majority of this type people. When asked by Taverner to name some of the people who were present at the meeting, Kawano obliged him by reeling off no less than 33 names, followed by the comment that there were a flock of others I cannot now remember. Taverner, sensing that something had gone awry, asked Kawano to run through the list once again to signify those who were and those who were not members of the Communist Party. As I understand, Taverner said, this was not a meeting of the Communist Party. Yes, Kawano insisted, this was a meeting of the Communist Party. But there could have been someone attending that meeting who did not suspect it to be a meeting of the Communist Party. Now, if Kawano's testimony about the 3 decisions made at the meeting is to be taken seriously, the statement that someone could have been there without suspecting that it was a Communist Party meeting makes no sense at all. It was characteristic of anti-communist testimony to take such turns. In the desire to build the most complete case possible, the witness would characterize every act of the accused as a communist act, whether it was made as a communist, a union man, a Democrat, or simply as an individual following the dictates of his conscience. But we must be careful that, having found a flaw in the witness's testimony, we not fail to give the rest of it proper consideration. Kawano was not the only one whose remarks suggest some serious problems in the proceedings. That July day in Washington, D.C., Representative Harold Velda, Republican from Illinois, a former FBI agent, made a blunder when, in the course of discussing the matter of the Communist Party's coming out into the open in Hawaii, he asked Kawano to elaborate upon testimony the former longshoreman had not yet given. The testimony is worth examining for its content as well as Velda's faux pas. Kawano described a meeting at Foster Gardens in 1948 at which the Executive Committee of the Communist Party in Hawaii discussed the question of coming out into the open with Harriet Bauslog and J.R. Robertson, first vice president of the ILWU from San Francisco. Kawano, present at this meeting were Jack Komodo, Jin Freeman, Koji Ariyoshi, Mr. and Mrs. Fujimoto, Jack Hall, myself, Mr. and Mrs. McElrath, Harriet Bauslog, and J.R. Robertson. Velda, did Harriet Bauslog engage in the decision as though she were a member of the Communist Party? Kawano, she did. Velda, do you remember if she opposed the idea? Kawano, Hall, McElrath and myself, together with Robertson, opposed the idea of coming out in the open. The rest favored coming out, including Harriet Bauslog. The meeting lasted 4 or 5 hours, but there was no meeting of minds. It was at this point that Velda asked his premature question. Velda, these two, Robertson and Bauslog, were the only two present at the Foster Gardens and Hanama Bay meetings who were not members of the executive board of the Communist Party. There was subsequent testimony about the Hanama Bay meeting, but a careful search of the transcript reveals no prior reference to it. The only reasonable inference from this is that Kawano's testimony had been carefully rehearsed for the benefit of the committee members in order to build the strongest possible case. In a setting where there was no cross-examination, the reader of the testimony is left with the uneasy conclusion that the deck was stacked. According to Kawano's testimony, the issue of whether the Communist Party in Hawaii should come out into the open was so volatile that it led, indirectly, to the expulsion of Robert McElrath from the party and, directly, to Kawano's own threatened resignation from the party. He apparently reconsidered resigning over the issue, though his testimony was not clear on the matter. The end of Kawano's testimony was concerned with the relationship of the Communist Party and the ILWU during the 1949 dock strike. He told the committee that at his last Communist Party meeting in June 1949, he was the only one present who was in opposition to having the sugar workers go on strike while the dock workers were out. Kawano testified that their plan was haywire and all wet. I said that their plan, if followed, would not help but would break the union. Though he had been the only one against the sugar walkout, Kawano said, among the sugar workers I agitated against a strike, and the strike did not materialize. In his closing remarks, Jack Kawano gave special thanks to those who had helped make him a good American: Chuck Mao, John Burns, Mitz Kaido, Ernest Murai, Sakai Takahashi, Dave Bentz, Dan Aoki, and Dan Inouye. In turn, Chairman Walter had some words of thanks for Jack Kawano. Mr. Kawano, the committee is indebted to you for your corning this great distance in order to give us the benefit of your deep knowledge of the machinations of this group of international conspirators. Reaction to Kawano's testimony was quick and corning. Koji Ariyoshi, editor of the Honolulu Record, commented, "When a disgruntled former labor leader falls into the hands of anti-labor elements, like the notorious Un-American Committee, he is forced to name names, to smear and bring disrepute to individuals, and in doing so, facts become important." Thus, the editor of the Record finds himself, in Kawano's testimony, attending communist meetings in Honolulu when he was actually serving in the army thousands of miles away in China. Also, as an Army intelligence liaison officer, he was supposed to have been making contacts in China with the Japanese communist leader, Tokuda, who was at that time serving his 8-year sentence in prison somewhere in Japan for opposing the Japanese militarists. The ILWU was also quick to denounce Kawano's testimony. The executive board of ILWU Local 136, the union of which Kawano had formerly been president, passed a formal resolution denouncing Kawano's testimony before HUAC. Among other things, they charged that 1. Despite the fact Kawano had been one of the original organizers of Honolulu's longshoremen, it had become clear that Kawano had lost all interest in the union and was more concerned with making political deals. 2. Though he stopped working, the union and its officials continued to carry Kawano. He has expressed his thanks by a base betrayal of the union. 3. During the 1949 strike, Kawano declined to be chairman of the strike committee, his logical responsibility as president of the local. 4. The only time Kawano showed any interest in the strike was when he tried to work a political deal to settle the strike for 14 cents. 5. Kawano did not stand for re-election in 1949 and could not have won if he had. 6. Kawano was finally dropped from the ILWU for non-payment of dues. 7. It was alleged that Kawano had told members of the executive board of ILWU Local 136 that he was working for the CIO National Organization and that he had been involved with Tim Flynn and the CIA's efforts to start up again in Hawaii after the ILWU's expulsion from the National Organization. There were charges that Kawano had been used by those members of the left-wing Democrats whom he described in his HUAC testimony as those who had helped to make him a good American, in order to demonstrate their loyalty and to establish their anti-communist credentials. The author finds something to be said for this argument, but there is a corollary to it. If Kawano were used by Chuck Mao and the others who convinced him to go to Washington, he was just as surely used by Jack Hall and those who helped make him into an important leader of the ILWU. In the author's 1975 interview with Robert McElrath, it became clear that Hall and McElrath thought of Kawano as their own creation. McElrath was quick to point out that he had written most of the public statements Kawano had made. There is considerable evidence that as the ILWU became more complex, as it became an established entity rather than a struggling union looking for a foothold, Kawano's usefulness to the ILWU diminished, and as meaningful participation was denied him, Jack Kawano became careless in the exercise of those responsibilities which were left to him. Jack Kawano was an important figure in Hawaii's labor history. The way in which he became involved in matters which were beyond his depth, and the way in which he was used by different people for their own purposes have strong elements of personal tragedy. Eventually, it drove Jack Kawano into exile from his native Hawaii, but Jack Kawano's story does not end with his testimony before HUAC. For reasons which seem largely to have been financial, Jack Kawano allowed a sensational version of his HUAC testimony, with some colorful additions, to be the basis for an article in the South Evening Post on February 2, 1952. The article, written by Richard English, was titled, "We Almost Lost Hawaii to the Reds." The article opens with a description of a conversation at a cocktail party on the windward side of the island of Oahu. Trade winds sighed through the palms, and clouds scudded across a flawless sky. The hostess is talking to a crew-cut Navy officer about the communist menace. "It's awful," she said, this gradually finding out how they had moved in everywhere. "It's like living on a volcano and feeling all that lava surging beneath you, ready to erupt at any moment." The article concluded, "The first Americans to be subject to a communist invasion are still stunned at finding it can happen here. And where, in the past, Hawaii's boosters hoped that by minimizing communism it would, like yesterday's tropical rain, just go away, they know better now. They realize that the strong red roots of the ILWU beanstalk on which the communists climbed to almost terrifying power are much too malignant for that." Jack Kawano's testimony before HUAC and its romantic elaboration in the South Evening Post became the object of heated controversy. It also became, in February 1953, the object of searching cross-examination by attorney Richard Gladstein since Kawano had become one of the key witnesses in Hawaii's Smith Act trial. The arrests which preceded this trial were made by the FBI in the early morning of August 28, 1951, less than 2 months after Jack Kawano's testimony in Washington, D.C.